It's chilly. How am I though? Oh, is it cold? Huh? We're live 8:59, a little bit before 9 o'clock. Today we're going to be talking about first, obviously, get your projects done. I see some sun poking out, although we did have to scrape the ice off of the windshields this morning because it got cold last night. But the sun's out now, so I'm thinking about wheeling the block out and maybe letting it sit in the sun for a little bit on the 396 so I could get the paint on it finally, and then also get maybe put the pan and stuff out there too. Get a quick coat on those so that they can get ready to be assembled. So in the, for this is morning time motivation, go out, get something done on your project, prep for the weekend, whatever you got to do, anything that you can get done, even if you're just taking 10 or 20 or 30 minutes or whatever, you need to motivate yourself and decide, hey, look, I'm going to go do this. Just, it's hard. We got to filter out all the other things that we have to do. Put those aside for a second. I'm focusing on this. Nothing else is going to bother me. I'm going to get this done. And then all the other things in life that we have to get done, they're all going to be there too. And then you can start going on those things and get them done also. So try to focus and get something done on your projects. Make sure that you get at least one thing done. You can check it off the list, and then you could go on and with all the other things. There are things that you want to get done and then things that you have to get done. Those are always going to be there. Project stuff, though, are things that we normally want to get done. And sometimes we have to get them done if we have to get our vehicle driving. But today we are going to talk about building that 302 LT1. You need to do that. I need to do that. When I say we need to do that, I guess I need to do that. The thing I want to talk about today is the dyno graph. So I wanted to bring that back up so I can reference it while I'm doing this discussion. The dyno graphs are very, very cool, and this is what I live for. This is what I've been doing for the last probably 30 years. I love seeing the difference in things. I love seeing what changes, but there's a lot more information that people don't get out of graphs. And if you've been doing these things, the dyno results basically, and just presented in graph form, and if you haven't been doing it a long time, it's like anybody that does woodworking. He can tell you things about it that most people can't. And if a guy does welding, he can look at welding and look at the thing that you made. He could tell you things about it that most normal people can. And dyno graphs are the same way. So there's a lot of information here that you can get that's more than just, oh, this did this and this did that. That's like the very basic amount. So if we look at this, if we look at the thumbnail that I have up, if you guys can go back and forth or bring it up or open up to do a picture in a picture kind of thing, you can see. But what this was a CX Racing turbo kit that we did a test for the guys at CX Racing, and we did it on an Integra. I think it was an Integra. I couldn't remember if it was a Civic with an Integra motor installed in it, but it was a B18A, so a non-VTEC 1.8 liter. And we ran their turbo kit on it. And it was a kit that they sell, that they still offer. It had a front mounted intercooler. It had a cast iron exhaust manifold. It had some kind of T3, T4 hybrid. I don't even remember what it was. But it was capable of doing over 300 at the tire. So it was fairly good size. It used their wastegate, and it had all the tubing and plumbing for the front mount and all that stuff. And I think that we did tuning back in the day. And I think Ernie did this, who used to work at West Tech. So shout out to my boy Ernie. Did a lot of stuff with him. He's an awesome guy. He's up in Oregon or Washington now. So it'd be cool to go up and see them. I did a lot of cool stuff with him and his wife. His wife is awesome. She was the one that was telling me that when we were doing the first big bang motor that I wasn't running nearly enough boost because we were going up in 1 or 2 pound increments. She said, you need to step your game up. So it was awesome to hang out with those guys. And I think that he did the tuning on this. It was either Chrome or Honda, one of those. But we ran the testing to see we kind of wanted to get an idea what the turbo kit would do, how much power that particular turbo had in it, and what these things would do, and see what happens as we go up and boost. So you can see from the graph that we have, these are 2 runs. There were many, many runs that we ran at different boost levels during the tuning process. And at 7.5 pounds, this thing made 211 at the tire. And then at 18 pounds, it made 310. So we see there's a lot of information here. One of the things is that obviously, first of all, this thing made 211 horsepower at 7 pounds of boost, or 7.5 pounds of boost, which is good. That gives us an idea. If we also had the NA power output, we obviously could figure out what the turbo was worth and what each pound of boost was worth. But there is another way that we can figure that out. At least we can see the differential between, 18 pounds and 7.5 pounds. So what we do, if we take our difference here, we do a little bit of math. Very simple, just adding, subtracting, dividing. So if we take 18 pounds minus 7.5, we get 10.5 pounds of boost. And if we take 310 horsepower and subtract 211, we get 99 horsepower. We could call it 100. So 100 divided by 10.5. So we're getting about 9.5 horsepower per pound of boost. So that's another way, that's more information that we just extracted from this combination. We could figure out what the turbo is doing like at each pound of boost. And all we did was take the differential between what it was at 7.5 pounds and what it was at 18 pounds to figure out how much we're getting for each one. If we had the NA dyno results from this thing, which I think we may have, because I think we ran this motor before we had the turbo kit installed on it. If we had that, we could also go from 0 PSI up to 7.5 PSI, see what that gain was, and then figure out if we're not only figure out if we're doing the same, are we still getting 9.5 pounds or so, 9.5 horsepower per pound of boost, but did it change? Were we doing better at the lower boost level? Are we doing better at the higher boost level? This, because we don't have a compressor map from this combination, this could kind of give us an idea where this turbo wants to make more power. Now, we'd also need to look at other things that are not on this particular graph. They were logged, but we're not showing it on this particular graph. We would need to see what the air, if there's a change in air fuel. Ideally, you'd want it to be, perfectly flat at 11.5 for every run, so that there's no change in air fuel. We'd also need to look at the timing. Did we change the timing going from NA to boosted? You're definitely going to change the timing. But did we change the timing going from 7.5 PSI to 18 PSI? More than likely, yes. So did we change the power? Did we start gaining less power per pound of boost because we dropped the timing? Did we put good gas in this thing, which we did, to make sure that it didn't hurt itself? Because that's very important. If you have pump gas in this, we're going to have to strip timing out of this thing as we go up in boost. And whether or not we could run 18 pounds, maybe we could on pump gas. But to do that, it'd have to have almost no timing in it. So certainly the gains that you would get going up on pump gas with higher and higher boost levels, the gains are just not going to be as good because you don't have the timing that the thing needs to optimize the power production. So already we have a lot more information in here than just these two numbers, that it made this number at 7.5 pounds and made this number at 18 pounds. The other thing this tells us in a grand scope, in the grand scheme of things, is that this motor obviously can be turbocharged, which is good news. Not really a revelation, because that's true of almost anything. We can usually add boost to anything if we do it correctly. If we have the right air fuel, we have the right timing. The other thing to think about on this, and this is the way that it is with any, especially a manual transmission deal, is, and particularly with Hondas, is that when we add boost to them, a lot of guys try to do it without thinking about things like the clutch. So what they find is that, it loves boost, zing, and then it blows through the clutch, and you're like, oh yeah, my clutch that was designed for 100 foot-pounds of torque is not going to work with 200 or 300 foot-pounds of torque now that I have boost. So you have to have, a good clutch in it, capable of, just because you could make 300 horsepower at the tire doesn't mean your clutch is going to be able to have enough clamping force to withhold that. It just is not going to work. So that's another thing that you need to think about when you're doing these kinds of gains. And this is something you'll realize after you've seen a couple of these, but more importantly, after you have not put a clutch in and tried to turbocharge it and then took it down the street or took it to a chassis dyno and tried to run it and the clutch is slipping. And then after you do that and replace the clutch and make it work, then every time you see a curve, you're like, oh, well, they obviously have their their clutch is obviously working. And when it's not, you'll see what happens to the curve. It just, the RPM goes crazy. It doesn't hold. It doesn't make any power. The other thing, there are other things that we can see on this from this graph also. One is that if you note, this thing is fairly repeatable in terms of how the power comes up. And you can see that whether we ran 7.5 pounds or 18 pounds, that the power curve below 4,500 RPM was identical. That means that this thing is repeatable, which is nice. And we obviously are partly responsible for that, making sure that we have enough temperature in the turbo and that the air going into the inlet of the turbo is the same. And all of that was taken into account. But you can see by any measure, that's pretty repeatable. So the thing comes up the same each time, and then it gets to the point where this thing gets happy and starts making boost. And as we went to 7.5 pounds, it made one power level. And as we went to more boost, we went even and made even more power, which is normal. But one thing you should be able to see from this curve, or from these two curves from this graph, is that on one of these, we revved it a lot higher than on another one. So on the high horsepower deal, which we shouldn't be doing, really shouldn't have been doing, but God bless Ernie and his desire, that his feeling that there's no boost that's too much and there's no RPM that's too much. And that's why on this one, when we were running the big boost, let's just see what happens. Well, you can see that on both of them, we are way past the power peak. So even at revving this non-VTEC motor to 7,000 or 7,100 RPM, we're pretty far past the power peak. In fact, looking at how jaggedy it starts getting, I'm wondering if we're running into some spring control issue, because this thing had stock cam and stock springs in it. But running it out to 7,500 is definitely way past the power peak, and getting into the realm where you would start to be concerned about things like valve float and valve train. Admittedly, it might be that revving that far out in a race might gain you something, because you would have good average power production. But as you go out more in RPM, you go into the area where there are more problems and more potential for disaster. So you can kind of gauge that looking at this graph and go, oh, look, that it's a B18A. That's a 6,000 RPM motor, or best a 6,500 RPM motor. The other thing you need to look at is, and again, it's not on this graph, but it was logged, is what does the boost curve look like? Because the boost curve, and this would be very telling if we had the NA curve up here too. If we had the NA curve, and you can look at the boost curve and go, oh, is the boost curve rising? Is it perfectly controlled? Is it falling? Because that is going to dictate the shape. It's going to help dictate the shape of the power curve. So if we have a rising curve, it's going to hold on longer than it normally would. If we have a falling curve, it's going to fall off quicker than it normally would. If it stays flat, it should be kind of identical to what was there before. And we had a conversation about this either last night or yesterday. Somebody was talking about changing the exhaust manifold on some turbo application and talking about it changing where the motor wanted to make peak power. And having never seen that, I finally got to thinking about it. And I thought, well, maybe what's happening when they did that the boost is not falling off, or they somehow changed the boost curve. Because if you change the boost curve, the shape of the curve, like how much boost it's making at every RPM, and it's making now more boost because it's not falling off, maybe the exhaust manifold was restrictive, and now the shape of the boost curve is different, you could definitely change where the thing wants to make power. But that's not really a function of the exhaust manifold so much, or its primary length, but more a function of what its change was to the boost curve. So we can it would be nice if we had the boost curve up here, because we could have even more information. But you can see, even from this discussion, there's a lot of stuff that we can look at and talk about. Hey, first of all, that you could look at this and go, this is going to be really fun. Again, especially if we had the NA curve and you knew what that felt like in your Integra, and you're like, oh yeah, having 50% or 60% more power or having 200% more power, this is going to be really fun. And they are. When you have a turbo car, no matter what it is, whether you have a turbo LS in a truck or in a Camaro or whatever, and you increase the power by 50%, it's a super noticeable amount of gain, and it feels a lot better. And then at 100%, obviously even better. And that's the same thing in a smaller motor, whether it's my little Sprint Turbo or a Civic or a VTEC motor, whatever it is. If you increase the power by 50%, it makes it at least 50% funner, and probably more like 100% funner. And then as you go up in power with boost, that's the nice thing. And this also shows that hey, look, with a turbo, we have the ability to go from, hey, this thing feels a lot better, to this thing feels like a lot better at 300 as opposed to 200. And that's just turning the boost up, but assuming that everything else is right, meaning the air, fuel, and timing and all that stuff. So let's see what you guys got going on. That's as I said, there's a lot of information there just from a simple graph, and it's like very cool stuff. So let's see what you guys got going on. We need to have a poll. Very simple poll. Do you own a turbo motor? Do you have a turbo on one of your vehicles? So let's see what's going on. This is like an online college science class, except one that people voluntarily come to. Yeah, no cutting class. That's right. Be like a carpenter, hit the thumb, step on it, and get there in RPM. Fall is over today. Tonight starts winter. 76 today's high, 20 tomorrow low. Alaska 90 miles, 90 minutes south of the windy. Yeah, Scott, definitely check for codes. JPL, what's up? Getaways here. Six-liter LS with a TVS. It's not a drive-by-wire throttle body, right? Go back and dismiss people from from the channel. So people are still talking about limp home mode. So let's see what our poll is doing. We got Stu on a turbo motor, 69% saying yes. The poll should have been, would you like to own a turbo motor? Should get us closer to 100%, right? I got two turbos. Well, that's you get to have you get to click yes twice then, right? Russell, a direct connection clutch is more efficient at transferring power, but there's an increase in torque due to torque multiplication from the torque converter, which will be faster. Same launch tire. That's a tricky question because the shock loading sometimes can get the thing to launch quicker. Sometimes, you know, spooling up the torque converter, getting it to launch works better. I think it would be you'd have to test it to find out. I got 2 cars with 4 turbos. Exactly. Twin for the win. With spare turbos. Well, if you have spare ones, you need to put those on too, Dan. Built and tuned to Vitara Long Rod D16 GTX 3576. That's a good sized turbo for that. $342 on 21 pounds. Nice. Gotta have spares. Russell, I have a 944 turbo that might become an NA car. Does it have the 944 turbo motor in it? Those are good. I like the turbo ones. Take my money, evil me. Any luck with getting an 8-liter Dodge V10? I've only ever seen one of those in the wrecking yard, and I've only seen one, and I did not get it. But evil me, you can turbocharge that very easily. They turbocharge. I know that this is a different engine than the Viper one, unless you have the SRT 10 truck. If it's the standard V10, you can still add boost to it. You can add boost to any motor. I mean, anything will run around with 7 pounds on it. I answered no, but I own my girl's EcoBoost. So that's a yes. Surprised that more than half of us have turbo engines. James, you know the person having the issue? Oh, with their codes. And an LY6 and LQ4 both will be boosted. That does count. If you, whether you have a turbo or your intent is to put the turbo, especially if you have the engine and you have the turbo, then that totally counts. I don't think that his V10, unless it's an SRT10 version of that truck, that it could just be the standard V10, which is not like the Viper motor. Should have done a 4-option pull. I don't have the ability to do that. Is it the larger bore that accommodates larger heads that makes the DZ302 so loved and the 307 from the same era so disregarded? It's probably more than that. The DZ302 has a 4-inch bore, which just means that you can use all of the heads. It had Fuelie heads on it, basically. But the reason that it was loved is because it was regarded as a performance motor, and a 307 was not. It was not advertised as a performance motor. It doesn't have a racing heritage where Donahue and Penske won 2 championships with it. You know, in the much like publicized Trans Am series, and now for nostalgia, people look back at that. And a 307 was never used as the power plant for what I think could arguably be the most beloved, the poster child of the muscle car era, which is the 69 Camaro. So it has the DZ302 has a lot going for it that the 307 doesn't, but you could make lots of power with the 307 also. It just doesn't have a heritage that the 302 does. Doing a razor blade rebuild on my Dodge 2.5. I have a small ridge at the top of the cylinder. That's pretty normal. Those cylinders, the older style motors, the like if you do an older Chevy, it's the same thing. It's going to have a ridge at the top. Do you remove them with a stone hone, or is there another method? Yeah, it's called a ridge reamer, and I don't even know if you'll. It used to be that the auto parts stores would loan you that tool, but you need a ridge reamer because it just cuts the ridge and it doesn't do anything to the rest of the thing. You could also do it with a stone hone, but the problem is you'd have to have a really small stone to do it, because if the stone, angles in and hits the bore, you're going to be troughing the bore too, which is not good. But yeah, just get a ridge reamer and that'll work. Can you explain differences between turbo compressor maps? Yeah, if you look at a compressor map, what it is it has a single, it has a single island of maximum efficiency. What it does, it tells you at what intersection basically of boost and flow. So you need to know the NA power output of the motor to determine what the power output is going to be at any given boost level. But at some intersection of boost and flow, this turbo will be really, really efficient. And that as you go away from that, it will be slightly less efficient. And quite honestly, any kind of racer is not running their turbo in the island of maximum efficiency. They're running it with to the far right corner where you have maximum airflow and or maximum boost is normally where they run it. So that island is only usually at some low or medium kind of boost level, and some not anywhere near maximum flow. So it just tells you where the thing is really at its absolute best. And then anywhere away from there, it's not. But you don't have to worry about being away from there. Like I said, most cases, people are not there. Just catching up on your live chat last night and wanted to ask about the Hooker turbo manifolds. Would they be good for 800 horsepower? Yes. And an S475 would be good for that. Richard, you can use a die grinder as a ridge reamer. Yep. The thing that's nice about getting rid of that ridge and that area, it's not touched by the ring. That's why it's still there, is because it's not being worn by the ring. And in the case, the ring is a little bit tougher than the cylinder bore is, and so it wears away the bore. And since the ring's not touching right there, it's not wearing that. So if you trim that away, even if that's a little bit bigger than it was originally, which that's been done before, it's not a problem because that's not a sealing area. Forgot they made the regular V10. Yep, they do. But still, it's a V10 with lots of displacement, and it's a V10, so it needs 2 turbos on it, or 1 turbo, whatever. But all of those motors, where like let's say that they were making 300 horsepower and you added boost to it, they were making a lot of torque anyway, and they're going to make even more torque at like 7 pounds. It'd be fun. Uh, 944s are very good track cars. They handle amazingly. Even stock ones were very good. I don't think a stock 944 transaxle will support 500 horsepower. The 944S or turbo trans will, though. Kevin, I'd vote no because my Turbo Jetta VR6 I built with a standalone ECU burned to the ground. That's not good. But you had one, so the answer technically is yes, that you had one or have one. Ridge reamer sounds above my pay grade. It's not. It's a really simple edge that you spin around. And I think if I remember right, we did ours with a ratchet. I don't think we even did it with a drill, if I remember. I had to do that on my first Camaro. Richard, to boost any engine, what are the things you have to look at before boosting it? Ideally, you'd want the motor to be in decent shape running NA. So is the thing right and tuned right, and is it running good now? it's always best to start with a known quantity, which is why when I run the motors on the dyno, if we go get a motor from the wrecking yard, I run it NA and just make sure that the motor's there. You don't want to be trying to cure a problem with a dead hole or a cylinder with it boosted, because it should have been right to begin with. It's harder to diagnose those things because then with turbo stuff on there, you start looking at different things. Oh, is the turbo leaking? Or, you look at other stuff. So get the NA motor, make sure it's running good. And then what we do on turbo stuff is bring the plug gap down to about 19 thousandths. Make sure you have good fuel. Make sure you can tune it, add boost. And if you add 7 pounds, like I said, 50%, 50% gain in power, pretty easy. You can also, if you want to do a cranking compression test of the motor, make sure that that's there. But if it's running and it's not smoking excessively, that's usually not a problem. If the ridge is pronounced, it might need to be bored. Yeah, that tells you, if you measure the ridge, you can see how much the bore size has changed, because this is what it was, because that hasn't moved, and this is what it is now. And you might look at it and go, oh, wow, I have a bigger displacement motor now. Did you see the guy's house that burned to the ground from the meteorite? His house got struck by a meteor? I have an 06 E90 330XI. It's the last inline 6 330XI. Really like to retain all-wheel drive. Is it strong enough, though, to run turbos on? Or turbo? Why would you remove the ridge? Sometimes you have to remove the ridge to get the piston out if you want to put ring gap in it. We had to do that on the trophy motor. But actually, as it turned out, I removed the ridge on one cylinder, and then I just flared the ridge, the lower edge of the ridge on all the rest of them. I just did that with a porting tool, so that then when the ring came up to it, the ring would just compress itself. It was like a little ring compressor would compress itself. We could take the piston out, because we want to take the piston out, and I wanted to check the ring gap, which was huge in this thing because the bore size was so big. Because we were eventually going to run boost, but I also wanted to see why this thing was not running right. It's just so much work blueprinting a junkyard engine. Yeah, I don't recommend doing that. So what I'm hearing is I can do a big bore with a $75 reamer. Well, you can at the top anyway, within a quarter of an inch or whatever, 200 thousandths of an inch. I had some pretty tough carbon buildup that created some sort of ridge that made it hard. Yeah, just wham, 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 wham. It comes out, takes all the carbon out too. Caleb, I have a Volvo S60R and 2 Golf Rs. Should be in therapy for my car addiction. Sad day today. Selling my fastback GT Mustang to make room for my new. Is it a? So it's like a 5-liter Mustang and not a fastback like 65. Do you want a turbo car? 67 versus 66% versus 34%. I left out the part where I want to put an LS in it. The turbo BMW motors actually work pretty good. It is a 66 GT fastback, like one that you could make a Shelby clone out of. That would be cool. I really like those. I like the 65s and 66s. I had a 65 notch GT hypo K car. Well, K car. It's a hypo 289 with a 4-speed and stuff. but a fastback would have been cooler. Yeah, usually a piece of wood and a hammer will get the piston out, especially if it's just carbon. Richard, you've mentioned DSM cars, but not said very much on 3000 GTVR4s or 300ZX turbos. I like both of those. I've done chassis dyno testing on the 3000 and also on the 300ZX twin turbo stuff, but not on the engine dyno. Got people all over the country contacting me for what are you asking for the 66? The 66 also has the are the other Mustangs like it, but the Shelby had the clear window on it, right? The GT500s. BR4s had their own problems. They definitely needed clutches when you started upgrading them. Are we back? Nope, 66 and 34 still. What's the best size turbo for a 4.8? A mild cam trying to make 800 to 1,000 stock heads. S475, S480, VS Racing 7875 is all right at right in that range. Just make sure you don't go too big on the camshaft on the 4.8, unless you want it also to rev. St. Cloud, Minnesota is in the house. Justin Gund Racing, is that what it is? Hope I pronounced that correctly. I guess you never found the stuff to put the 2225 on the dyno. Yes, I did. We made the adapter to mount the bell housing. We already have that there. That's already ready to go. I just need to put the motor, assemble the motor. It's all the machine work's already been done at. Vacuum systems on the VR4s. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Yeah, it's strictly a drag car, but it's a true GTK code fastback. Oh, that's got value then. How big would you go on the cam? Is that the 4.8 question? To make 1,000 horsepower, you don't need a very big cam. If I'm hoping that it has a converter on it. If you have a converter, you could go with the truck Norris. That's probably about as big as I would go. Is a Chevy big block substantially superior to a BOP? I don't know what you mean by superior. It's a internal combustion engine is just a air pump. You can make lots of power with either one of those. There are more parts available for a big block, and I don't know how much power you want to make, but a big block would be a step up from a 350 Pontiac, but not as much of a step up, or arguably even a step up from a 455. Because a bigger motor, a 454, is going to make more power than a 350. I have a handful of older small turbos for my Cummins and my Spirit, but going from no boost to boost is almost, it's once you run like, and you see this on things like the Hondas specifically, but once you have a motor like that and you're driving it around in your Del Sol, your Civic or whatever, and you're driving around, especially a non-VTEC one, but at least the non-VTEC ones, especially particularly the 1.8s versus the 1.6 VTEC motors. The 1.8s just feel torquey. They make more low speed power. They're better. But then when you add boost to that, you're like, oh, that's really cool. All of them should have come like this. Back for a few minutes. Hard to choose between the BTR torque cam or the NSR cam. Going with a. Are you using a manual trans? If I was using a manual trans, I would go with a truck Norris cam, and an NSR one would be fine. Although if I was doing boost, I probably would put springs in it anyways. Smitty, yeah, it's not a stage one. It's just a truck Norris cam. Davis, you have a 6-liter with a torque cam, 500 wheel horsepower. I would almost be tempted to put a GT45 on that for 500 wheel horsepower. It'll be really responsive. I had a bare aluminum LS head tip over into concrete, into the mating side. You should be able to get all that concrete off. It didn't fall into the concrete and then harden, right? And you should be able to just clean it off, right? I think you talked about this before. How do you pick the proper intake duration to hit a given RPM for peak power versus displacement? There isn't a direct formula for that because the camshaft's not the only thing that's going to determine where the thing makes peak power. And the intake duration isn't the only thing that's going to determine where the thing is going to want to make peak power. There's lots of stuff that go into that, particularly the intake manifold runner length, and then head flow, and then exhaust duration. More exhaust duration you put in it, the better off it's going to do at the top end. I was told all Buick Pontiac BOPs are big blocks. That's not the case. They're not all small blocks and they're not all big blocks. There is no really technically a big block and small block version of those, although I say that there is. A 455 Pontiac is a big block. A 326 Pontiac is a small block to me, although they're the same dimensionally. The block is the same. The only thing that they do change is the main journal size on the cranks on the bigger Pontiacs, the 455, the 421, and the 428 are all the big journal cranks. And then the 400s and smaller are the smaller journal stuff. I think that's the breakdown. But other than that, they're the same. They're the same deck height and stuff. There are some minor changes in deck height with some small ones like 301s or 303s or something. But again, they just don't label them as big block and small block like Chevy does. I think the Cadillac did use the BOP bolt pattern. Dan, it does count if your son or friends have one. Can you make power with a Ford 289 without boost? Yeah, they've run them in lots of racing series. So it's a short stroke motor, has enough bore. You could put there are lots of cylinder heads for them. They just don't make as much as a bigger 302 or a 351 or 400. Your 250 inline 6-cylinder needs boost. You could just plug any motor into that. I've had a couple of turbos and a couple of superchargers. It is. Life is better with boost. You can get a dual pattern Turbo 400 case from the aftermarket. Yeah, we run the bell housing that Westech has. I think will run Chevrolets and BOPs on the same one. Which is better, boost cooler before the intake or under? Are you talking about an intercooler? An intercooler is going to be positioned between the turbo or supercharger and the throttle body. Was that your question? So our yeses are down to 63%. We need to get more turbo people here. Jeff, I'm scrolling back to find out what your comment was about the deshrouding effect. Once upon a time, you said 100 horsepower liter was achievable, but sport bikes can hit double that. Why are no hot rods at that level? There are. You can do much more than 100 horsepower per liter. If you see race engines are at way more than that. Formula One engines, particularly the NA Formula One engines, were at more than that. With the way you ran the 2-barrel on a 292 with boost be drivable? No. All we did was put that 4412 with like 100 jets in it and ran E85 in it. And it was okay at wide open throttle, but it would certainly not be drivable. You just would need a blow-through carburetor, and a small blow-through 4-barrel would be good. Although you could do it as a blow-through 2-barrel also. But the 292, I think I would feel much better if you had better fuel distribution with that manifold and it being a like Siamese runners and the heads. I just just am leery of that. Jesse, so you have a 331 Extreme Energy 274 Trick Flow 170 heads, and you want to run an EFI intake manifold. The new Hiram probably would be good if you have hood clearance. If you don't have hood clearance, the System X or one of the Trick Flow ones. Tick makes an intercooler that goes under the intake manifold. Theirs is sandwiched like on a Hiram. If I know which one you're talking about, it's sandwiched between the lid of the Hiram and then the lower manifold. So it's not below the manifold, because below the manifold would be the cylinder head. So it's between the throttle body and the intake manifold, and those sandwich intercoolers can work also. One of those is not better than the other. All you're trying to do is cool the air. So cooling the air is going to be a function of how big the core is, how cold your transfer medium, the thing that you're using to cool it, is. And then also you need to balance your pressure loss across the core, which there will be some if you change the temperature. So basically, what is the flow rate of the core? And then how good is it at cooling? Are you going to test any of the other new cams? I tested the Hot Rod cam and the Red Hot cam already. Those are two new ones that they have. Why can't dynos measure from 1,000 RPM? Well, let me ask you this. When are you at wide open throttle at 1,000 RPM? So there's no reason to test that. In any sort of automatic at 1,000 RPM, you're not even at the stall speed of the converter. So you would always be at near 2,000 RPM at wide open throttle. And then why would you be at wide open throttle unless you're power braking it for a launch at that engine speed? The reality is when you're trying to do performance stuff and you're at wide open throttle, you're almost always at a higher engine speed. What's better for higher power, larger diameter bearing journals or smaller ones? Are you talking about for the rods and crank? Testing at wide open throttle at idle. Yeah, I've had people ask me that. Why don't you run from like off idle to whatever they want, from off idle, which is like 600 RPM or whatever, all the way to 7,000. Okay, I get it. You want a curve that's like, showing all the stuff. But you never use that down there. That's not a real thing. They're just used to seeing, like, at a chassis dyno, you actually can do that. You can have the thing be at 1,000 RPM while you're on the roller, and then push the button and go to wide open throttle. And on chassis dynos, you can actually do that. But again, I think that that's doing a disservice, because you don't want to teach people to be at wide open throttle at 1,000 RPM. Regardless of what the thing is doing there, you should not be driving it like that if you're trying to maximize the performance of your vehicle. The UK is in the house. Love the channel. You inspired me. I have to build an NOS motor. It's a 4-banger 2-liter. Nice. It's about 190 horsepower NA. That's a good motor. So what motor is it, Penguin? Is it a Z-Tech? Is it a Honda? Is it a Volkswagen? What is it? Would you have to have ring gap suggestion for 30 to 50 horsepower nitrous shot? I don't think so on that application. Not for that NA power output and that nitrous shot. How good is auto tune? What is auto tune? Where you're just having it drive around in closed loop? Will your software do that? If you program in that you want it to be at 12.5 at wide open throttle, will it achieve that? And then also on your auto tune, does it change timing? Because air fuel is pretty easy, but what timing do you want? And can you program all of that in? Kevin or whoever was asking about the bearing journal sizes, that's a small thing that we worry about. That's not a big thing. That's something that you worry about at elevated engine speeds and elevated power levels, not street engine stuff. Ford Pinto 2-liter, and you're making 195 horsepower with it. So does it have a really good cylinder head on it? Does it? Please tell me it has like a Cosworth head on it. That would be awesome. Or even an Esslinger head or an aluminum motorsport head or something. Good cam for a 305 without changing the bottom end. You don't have to change the bottom end, but take a look at some of the cams that we ran in the 305 videos I have up. So 218, 224, 224, 232 kind of thing. I'm off to the ball to my Golden. Does your Golden bring it back, or does your Golden run out and grab it and then walk up to you and then just sit about 5 or 10 feet away and then chew on the ball? How about a large turbo test? Well, the Big Bang stuff already kind of does that. We use 2 of them, but it would be the same for a big single. Caleb, I just purchased the correct 074 heads for my 05269 ZL1. Nice. So shy of the correct exhaust manifolds. Now I have everything to build it. That's very, very cool. I would imagine that those heads were not cheap. And also, I would imagine that, are the exhaust manifolds specific to the ZL1? Or are those the same as the like the 425 horse 427? Do they share that exhaust manifold, or do they share it with an L88? Yes, a good cylinder head, 230 from a 2.3 version, full race cams, tuned to my house. Nice. Very cool. So lots of head flow, big cam. What intake are you using? Are you using like side drafts on it, or like side draft Webers, or is it a an IR like individual runner stack injection? You say that maximize the OE engine and then supercharge it. And superchargers mostly they delete runners like the Whipples. They do, and that's one of the things that we've discussed with positive displacement superchargers, Whipples and Kenny Bells and the TVSs, and even if you go back in the day to the 471s and 671s and 871s, all the manifolds that they use for those roots blower deals were all this just, it's basically just a place for us to put the supercharger on. It's a big common plenum with very, very short, if any, runners at all, sometimes just a radius entry into the head. Because, the blower, immediate boost, you want to get that in immediately to the runner. And I think that maybe they were doing this before they realized it, or it's just simply a packaging deal and we can't put runners in there. Ideally, it would be awesome to see a cross ram inside there, or you could do like Freiberger did when they did the test, and other guys have done this too. You put that big supercharger on top of a tunnel ram that has runner length, which is also good. But yeah, getting rid of runner length has the same effect, boosted and unboosted. You lose power through most of the curve. What do you think of a TKM black sheep or lamb cam? I don't know what those are or who makes those. If you knew what the specs were, I could tell you what they would do. Marty, I don't have a recommended amount of time to take out per pound of boost. That's not how I usually do it. New to use an air fuel and O2 sensor, idle 11.6 to 12.0, cruising at 13.6 to 14.0. The cruise RPM would be right. I think you'd want to idle it leaner than that. So growing up, I always thought that running richer was better. Running richer at wide open throttle is safer, let's say, but not for cruise and idle. I sold heads at an auction for $1,000. They have 0 damage. Wow, that's cheap. I got to think that those have to be $4,000 or $5,000 heads, I would imagine. IR ITD 4548 DCOAs. Yeah, cool. That's very cool. Monza, that's cool. 790 horsepower is a lot. About 1,000 horsepower blow through versus 1,000 horsepower fuel injection. Some engines say same engine, same turbo. They say blow through will make more power. Well, do you want them both to be intercooled? And are you blowing through a carburetor? Is that what you want to do? Or blow through fuel injection? Do you want them both to be intercooled? And then what fuel would you do the test on? Because all of those things would affect what the outcome is. And then ultimately what you'd have is if blowing through the carburetor because you're getting charge cooling and you don't have it with the fuel injection, with port injection, makes more power, which it certainly can, but depending on the fuel that you're using and whether they're both intercooled. If you do one intercooled with the EFI and one non-intercooled with the blow through, my guess is the intercooled version is going to make more power. If you do them both intercooled, the blow-through carbureted deal might make more power, but what it won't do, and what I've never seen, is with a blow-through carbureted deal, you will never have the drivability that you will with an EFI. You'll never have drivability and part throttle and wide open throttle. You'll never have the air fuel be right under all those circumstances with a blow-through carburetor. It just won't. And I love Kevin, and we've used his carburetor and stuff a lot, and it's worked really well. But I've never seen somebody get all of that. You can never get what you out of a carburetor, what you can with fuel injection. You can't get individual cylinder tuning. You can't get tuning at individual, specific RPMs and loads. You just can't do that. But the charge cooling, there's definitely something to be said for that. Is the centrifugal blower that much worse than the screw types that having runners or not doesn't make more power, the centrifugal ones? No, runner length always adds power. Runner length, having the right runner length for the engine speed that you're running always adds power compared to not having runners, whether it's NA, whether it has any kind of supercharger on it, whether it has any kind of turbo on it. Centrifugal stuff typically has runner length because the centrifugal is just going to be like a turbo, just blowing through the stock manifold or a fast manifold or whatever manifold you want on there. If you shorten the runner length, you're just going to change where the motor wants to make power at a higher engine speed. And it does that regardless of what blower or turbo you have on it. His first engine was a 355 with Indy cylinder head ported Dart World product Sportsman 2 heads. I didn't think Sportsman 2 heads were very good even when they were ported. Putting it in an X4469 Camaro. Cool. What's the biggest advantage of port injection versus throttle body injection? Well, being able to tune individual cylinders, because you can't do that with TBI. TBI is much more like carburation, but it would be the step in between carburation and fuel injection in terms of tunability. So the carburetor, you go to wide open throttle, and then the air fuel turns out the way that it is. You can jet it and do air bleeds and things. And some guys tell you that, I can tune it at individual RPM, but they can't. The only way that you could do that would be with signaling changes, a metering block maybe. But you can never do with a carburetor what you can with fuel injection. So, but with throttle body injection, you run into the same thing. The nice thing about throttle body injection is you can tune it at load and RPM. So if it's 11.8 at 3,500 RPM wide open throttle, you can make that be 12.8 if that's what you want it, just at that RPM, and not have any effect anywhere else. That's really, really hard to do with a carburetor. But the throttle body injection will not allow you to do tuning in individual cylinders, and you're definitely going to have changes in individual cylinders based on the intake manifold, whether it's a single plane or a dual plane. The individual cylinders will have different air fuels in them while you're running them. So port injection allows you then to go in and take that next step and do individual cylinder tuning. I have a 4x4 single cab with a 4.8, 255,000 miles. I want to have a fast daily. What do I need? Cheap budget. Boost is your best answer. Otherwise, a cam and springs. Marty, obviously we run less boost. His question is, I'm sure you made a video about taking spark out for boost, but could you quickly explain how you adjust a timing curve under boost? A timing curve under boost would be based on whatever the timing curve is, NA. And the way we find the timing curve NA is we will make pulls at low timing. And after we have adjusted the air fuel, let's say it's a fuel injected LS, we start out with the thing being rich. We take fuel away until it stops making power, and then we keep it there. And then we were running, let's say that this motor at a typical LS wants 29 degrees. We start at 24, let's say, and then we start adding timing. And as we're adding timing, we'll get to a point down low where it stops making more power. And so down low at a lower engine speed and below the torque peak, the motor's going to want at those RPM less timing than it wants at the top. You'll want more timing at higher RPM than you will at lower RPM. So you'll have some sort of curve. So let's say it goes from 22 degrees at 3000 and ends up at 29 degrees at 6500. For most of the RPM range past the torque peak, it's going to want the same timing. Then we take that timing curve, wherever it is, we add boost, and then we'll drop it down. Normally under boost, we're running with the right kind of fuel. We're running 20 degrees at the top, or 21 or 22 degrees. It will be less as we go up in boost, but that gives you a pretty good idea. Richard, do you have a good website or formula for calculating proper runner length? No, that's really, really difficult calculating it. It's better to take a look at dyno results and see where you would want to be versus RPM based on those results. Does the old Predator carb variable CFM change anything with tunability? I have no experience with a Predator carb. I haven't used one. A variable Venturi carb, in theory, you would think would be ideal, but in terms of signal strength, but I don't know if they actually do that. All right, Butcher, see you later, man. Richard, is there a fuel you can use that you don't have to pull timing with boost and nitrous? Well, the motor is also, it's not just a function of doing it for safety. Under boost and under higher cylinder pressure, the combination doesn't need as much timing to be optimal. So you're probably going to pull timing. With nitrous, we've run lots of stuff where we don't pull timing. What EFI do you recommend for a 500 cubic inch Buick? What's the best EFI for 1,000 horsepower? There is no best one. There are lots of EFI systems that you can run. We run Holley. There's Fast or Haltech or Motec or all kinds of stuff that you can run that will give you the right air, fuel, and timing. And that's all you really care about. There's no EFI that's going to do a better thing than others in terms of the wide open throttle stuff. When you're choosing an EFI system, you would want to choose it based on other things. Do you want transmission control? Do you want, boost in gear? Does it have other aspects of it, other things, parameters that you could use that some systems don't have? All of them, even a factory ECU, would give you the ability to get the power that you want. That's really a simple thing. Been on Wallace Racing for the past month for platinum volume and runner length. Good luck with doing all of that. The graph is in the thumbnail for this video. Can you know if turbo is creating back pressure from a dyno graph? We can when we log boost pressure and back pressure, which we normally do, not from the graph itself. Because there would be, if let's say the power falls off, you don't know if the power is falling off because of runner length, because of a drop in boost. There are lots of things that could be contributing to that. So unless you have the correlating data, it wouldn't tell you that. Have you measured the horsepower loss of spinning the turbos? No. That's one way to put it, but you would want to just see if one turbo made more than the others. And I doubt that that's the case from like ball bearing turbos and stuff and journal bearing turbos. They make pressure cans for measurements on back pressures. It's easy to measure back pressure on the dyno. What trends on the dyno graph show you decent compression cam, but poor head flow? there wouldn't be something specific in the graph that shows you that. But if you have poor head flow and the poor head flow would manifest itself in a low NA power output. And then so you would get less horsepower per pound only because you're making less NA power. But a camshaft would also do that. A restrictive intake would also do that. All of those things that hurt NA power are ultimately going to hurt what you do under boost. Yesterday, my friend's Gen 6 454 made 470 horsepower and 550 foot-pounds. ZZ 502 cam, that's good. Lightly ported stock heads, RPM intake, Holly 800, that'll be good. You have any fuel rail and injector upgrade recommendations? We run the stock rails. You don't need anything bigger than a stock rail. And there's lots of 80-pound injectors, the Deca Siemens deals. What EFI is equivalent to 900 to 1100 CFM? I don't know what you mean by that. Always lots of new projects coming up. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our thing. We're down to 59% on the yes, and the no's trickling in at 41%. More people need to get boost, right? That's what it means. Triple turbo testing. I think we need more than that. I want to do 8. I want to have them all in a row in front of the motor. Okay, guys, thank you all for showing up. Go get your projects done. And obviously 40% of you or whatever need to go get turbos on your motors, or just go buy a turbo. And then you could say, look, I have a turbo. I don't know what I'm going to put it on yet, but at least I can answer yes to the poll. So thank you guys all for showing up. I got to go get a video done. I'm doing the back pressure on the Holley Hooker exhaust manifold test. For some reason, that video is not up anymore, so I'm going to redo it and put it up there. And I need to find out from YouTube, why would they be pulling videos down from my thing? Because those should all stay up there and be there forever. That's why I did them. I'll see you guys actually tonight. Oh, and by the way, yesterday, my anniversary with my lovely wife, Lisa. See you tonight.